Chapter 14. Before the Drowning of the World. Seth and Ellie held hands as the rest of the world rushed up to meet them. The street was a tiny slither of cobblestones below. The wind howled in Ellie's ears. Her stomach churned. The street was not so tiny anymore. Save us, she thought. Save us from the fall. Their feet met resistance, and Ellie's body seized up. She felt one single moment of terror. It hadn't worked. But it wasn't hard cobblestones they'd hit. Beneath them, something sagged and split. They dropped like stones through wet paper, and were caught a second time. Again the surface tore, and above them Ellie saw the ragged remains of the first sheet of canvas that had broken their fall. They fell again, and each time her heart exploded in her chest. The final layer of canvas did not tear. They bounced off it gently and toppled onto their backs. Above them were 4 punctured circles of canvas, letting in a trickle of sunlight from the street above. They'd fallen through a perfectly round hole in the street into a narrow tunnel. It looked like part of the sewers. Ellie's body felt weak, her mind empty. She lay motionless until a sharp sting of fear forced her to get up. She stepped in a puddle of brown silt, which she hoped wasn't sewage. Seth leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "What just happened?" he said. "I don't understand. You said there weren't any entrances to the sewers near the tower." "I made this hole," she said, lying quickly. Seawater dripped from her hair. "You made this? In case I ever had to jump from that tower," she said. "I put a bomb under the cobbles and, I blew it up while we were falling." Seth narrowed his eyes. "That doesn't make any sense. How could you?" "Look, we need to go before the Inquisitors find this," said Ellie, pointing at the hole above them. It was as wide as a church door, torn straight out of the cobble street. She pulled Seth with her along the narrow, slimy tunnel. "But why did those fireworks go off?" said Seth. Ellie, I can tell you're lying. This has all been Finn's work, hasn't it? Why are you trying to protect him?" "Look, I'll explain everything when we get back to the workshop, all right?" she said, hoping to buy herself more time. Seth looked unconvinced. "But hey," she said, happy to change the subject, "you did it. You controlled the sea. It was incredible, Seth." Seth frowned, rubbing the back of his head. "It didn't feel incredible. I think it nearly drowned me. I couldn't focus. All I felt was that anger. I thought I was completely alone, drowning, until I saw you." He stared at her, and Ellie shuffled her feet, feeling her cheeks go slightly hot. "Oh, well, I'm glad the flashbang got your attention." She cleared her throat. "Come on, we should go." She fished a small metal box from her pocket and removed a watch, drawing it sharply against the wall. Sparks leapt from the end, soaking the tunnel with a flickering orange light. She led the way, the sound of rushing water not far ahead. "You'll be able to take the sewers back," Ellie said, pulling a compass from her pocket and squinting at it. "My second workshop isn't far from here, and I know the way from there to Orphanage Street." "You have a second workshop?" said Seth as they descended a set of slippery stairs. Ellie nodded. "It's hidden in an abandoned ruin right next to the sea. Anna and I built it last year so I could start working on my underwater boat. It's a boat that can go underwater," she explained. "Yes, I figured that out." Navigating the sewers was no simple task. In most places, they were not supposed to be navigated. They were a meandering labyrinth of stone and rusted metal, crafted together from a ruin of storm drains and long abandoned streets. Only in certain tunnels were there walkways along the sewer flow. Even then, they often had to hunch over. The stench of sewage was everywhere, and Ellie felt that it would linger forever, not just in her clothes, but in her hair and on her skin. After many long minutes, they entered a chamber much larger than those before it. Ellie lit a fresh match, holding it up to reveal their surroundings. "This looks more like a crypt than a sewer," said Seth. "It is a crypt," said Ellie. Sewage water passed disrespectfully between worn old tombs, their bases thick with moss. "These people all died before the Great Drowning. The sewers were built around them." At the far side of the crypt, they found an old toolbox, a beaten copper helmet, and a tattered, mouldy jumper. Inside the toolbox, to their relief, was a rusted old oil lamp, which Ellie filled with whale oil from a flask in her pocket. They did not stick around to wonder what had happened to the toolbox's owner. They carried onwards, though they must have only been a wealthy man's mansion. Before the drowning, there had been so many people that they had built streets on top of streets, so that many ended up buried and forgotten. Ellie and Seth climbed giant marble staircases and hurried along dank-smelling wine cellars. Once they stumbled upon the bones of a killer whale scattered on the floor with no clue as to how they'd got there. Minutes later, Seth pointed out a vast mural on the wall. They were inside what looked like an old church. "What's that?" he said. Ellie held up the lamp, washing the gloom from the mural. At its centre was a gigantic, shaggy wolf, lying dead in the snow. It was old, its dark coat grizzled and its teeth worn and broken. Its mouth was wide open, and from inside a glowing woman emerged. 100 other people and animals had gathered round, seemingly to greet the woman. Humans dressed in furs and feathers, bears and eagles and snakes and goats bowing before her. The woman had a golden halo around her head, and among the people and animals there were others with halos too. "Why do some of them have halos and others don't?" Seth asked. I don't know," said Ellie. She leaned in closer, admiring the delicate brushstrokes of the woman's face. The paint was faded, seemingly ancient, yet the intense, passionate look in her eyes and her slight smile had survived the centuries intact. "This must be from before the drowning," said Ellie. "I've never seen anything like it in a church before. There are paintings of the saints where they have halos, but why would an animal have one?" She inspected a grey horse with a black mane and a glittering halo of gold leaf. Then something clattered in the far distance, echoing through the tunnel. "Come on," Ellie whispers. "We should keep going." But Seth kept looking back at the mural until it was sucked up again by the gloom, his eyes full of wonder. Soon the sewers became cramped passageways that climbed up and up. They heard water dripping in unseen places. "Your second workshop's not actually in the sewers, is it?" Seth asked cautiously. "Of course it is. I mean, it is in the sewers, but there's no sewage running through it," she added, seeing Seth's look of horror. "It doesn't smell or anything." Seth looked unconvinced. They hurried along a more spacious tunnel where there was a slight, fresh breeze. They could hear the crashing of waves against stone. Finally, Ellie led Seth through a rusted metal door, and they were dazzled by a dim haze of daylight reflecting off the sea. They'd emerged into a small, gloomy ruin that smelled strongly of salt and seaweed, but it was fresher, by far, than the sewers. It had a high limestone ceiling from which long stalactites descended, and one of the walls had crumbled away completely, the floor falling sharply into the sea beneath. To one side were 4 workbenches surrounded by heaps of tools and scrap metal. It looked like someone had emptied a small portion of Ellie's workshop inside a dilapidated building and made no effort to rearrange the result. "I can tell you've been here before," said Seth. Ellie scowled at him, then collapsed against a rock. Her damp clothes still clung to her body, but she was too exhausted to care. She watched as Seth explored the workshop. He paused to look out to sea, then glanced below. On a low stone quay, propped up on large wooden trestles, was a clunky, inelegant contraption about the size of a horse-drawn cart. It looked like a very large turtle made from leather and metal, with a massive propeller on its front and large rudder extending from its back. That's the underwater boat, so I said. Does it work? No. What's wrong with it? It sinks. Seth's shoulders dropped. Well, I am trying to fix it, said Ellie crossly. In case you haven't noticed, I've been a little busy trying out how to keep you safe. Ellie frowned at the underwater boat a little longer. She had first had the idea to build it when her brother was still alive, so that she could show him the sea. But like so many of her machines, it lay discarded and broken. How many times had she promised Anna that she'd fix it? Anna! In the chaos of their escape from the oystery, Ellie had forgotten all about her. She had to get back to Orphanage Street to make sure she was okay. We need to go, she said, picking herself off the ground. Then she noticed Seth inspecting a cupboard that was overstuffed to the point the wood had buckled. He reached for the latch. Seth, don't! She cried. The doors burst open and 100 things cascaded to the floor. Oops, said Seth. You're so messy. Sorry, I didn't think. Clearly, said Ellie snapped, kneeling to gather it all up, her cheeks reddening. She grabbed a framed self-portrait of her mother, a teddy bear and, her breath caught, a blanket that had belonged to her brother. She hurriedly stuffed them back in the cupboard. You forgot this, said Seth, picking up a slim book that had landed beside him. Give that to me, please, Ellie said, her voice strangled. Seth frowned at it, rubbing his fingers over the lettering on the spine. I've heard this name before, he said. The Inquisitors mentioned it when they had me in the keep. It's really boring. You don't want to read it. Why don't you try one of these instead? Ellie went to grab a book from the workbench. But who was he? Seth held up the book, revealing the title. The Diary of Claude Hestermeyer. Ellie felt a hot coal roll around in her stomach. Honestly, it's really not... Ellie, she sighed. All right. Claude Hestermeyer was the vessel, the last one to be found. 23 years ago, the enemy broke out of him and tore off Hargrath's arm.